The sky burned crimson as the alien fleet descended upon Earth, their massive warships blotting out the sun. For decades, the Galactic Dominion had conquered world after world, crushing civilizations beneath their might. Humanity had watched from afar, helpless as colony after colony fell. But now, the invaders had come for Earth, the last free planet in the sector. The Dominion's leader, a cold and calculating warlord, had expected an easy victory. Humans were primitive, divided, and weak. Or so they thought. The first strikes came without warning. Cities were reduced to rubble, millions perished in minutes, and governments collapsed under the sheer weight of the attack. The world trembled, but it did not break. In the ruins of fallen nations, survivors crawled from the wreckage. Soldiers, scientists, engineers, ordinary people who refused to surrender. They had one advantage the aliens had overlooked: humanity's relentless will to fight back. Deep beneath the mountains, in hidden bunkers and forgotten labs, the last remnants of Earth's military and scientific community gathered. They had been preparing for this day, though few had believed it would come. Old weapons were dusted off, experimental technology was activated, and a desperate plan took shape. The aliens had superior firepower, but humans had something far more dangerous: ingenuity. A brilliant physicist, known only as the Professor, had spent years studying captured Dominion technology. He had found a flaw, a weakness in their shields. If they could exploit it, Earth might stand a chance. Meanwhile, in the scorched remains of a once great city, a lone soldier moved through the shadows. He had no name, no rank, just a rifle and a burning hatred for the invaders. He had seen his home destroyed, his family taken. But he was not alone. Others like him had banded together, forming a resistance that struck from the darkness. They were not an army, not yet. But they were learning. Every ambush, every stolen weapon, every fallen alien taught them how to fight. Above them, the Dominion's warlord watched with amusement. These humans were stubborn, but resistance was futile. His fleet was invincible, his soldiers unmatched. Soon, Earth would kneel like all the others. What he did not know was that humanity's greatest strength was not in its weapons, but in its refusal to accept defeat. The day of reckoning was coming. The day Earth would fight back. The resistance grew like a wildfire, spreading through the ruins of Earth's once great cities. What had begun as scattered survivors hiding in the shadows now became a network of fighters, united by a single purpose: to strike back. The aliens had expected submission, but instead, they found traps in the streets, sabotaged supply lines, and ambushes in the dead of night. The warlord's confidence wavered. These humans were not like the others. They did not break. They adapted. Beneath the surface, the Professor and his team worked tirelessly. The Dominion's shields were powered by a rare energy source, one that could be disrupted by a precisely tuned electromagnetic pulse. The problem was scale: how could they create a weapon powerful enough to affect an entire fleet? The answer lay in Earth's own forgotten technology. Before the invasion, a prototype superweapon had been abandoned, deemed too dangerous. Now, it was their only hope. Above ground, the soldier and his band of fighters launched their boldest attack yet. A Dominion supply depot, heavily guarded but crucial to the enemy's operations, became their target. Under the cover of a dust storm, they moved in. Explosions rocked the compound as the resistance fighters struck with brutal efficiency. They weren't just stealing weapons, they were sending a message. The aliens were not invincible. News of the attack reached the warlord, and for the first time, anger flickered in his cold eyes. He had crushed countless species, yet these humans refused to die quietly. He ordered a brutal retaliation: entire cities were to be purged, their populations wiped out as an example. But the more force he used, the more the resistance grew. The people of Earth had nothing left to lose. Back in the underground lab, the Professor's team made a breakthrough. The superweapon could work, but it needed one final component: a power source strong enough to amplify the pulse. The only one capable of such energy output was the Dominion's own flagship reactor. A suicide mission. Someone would have to infiltrate the heart of the alien fleet. The soldier volunteered without hesitation. He had seen enough death, enough suffering. If this was the way to end it, he would not back down. The plan was simple: a small team would sneak aboard a captured Dominion shuttle, disguised as prisoners. Once inside, they would plant the device and trigger it remotely. The risks were unimaginable. The chances of survival, slim. As the shuttle lifted off, the warlord's fleet loomed in orbit, an unstoppable force. But the soldier did not look at the ships with fear. He looked at them with determination. The aliens had underestimated humanity. They had assumed Earth would fall like all the others. But today, they would learn the hard way: humans did not go quietly into the night. They fought back. The stolen Dominion shuttle shuddered as it docked with the flagship, its human crew hidden among the captured prisoners being processed. The soldier kept his head low, his hands bound in front of him like the others, but his eyes scanned every detail: the layout of the hangar, the positions of the guards, the rhythm of their patrols. The aliens moved with mechanical precision, confident in their dominance. They did not expect defiance from slaves. A sharp command in the guttural alien tongue forced the prisoners to their knees. One of the humans, a young engineer from the Resistance, trembled slightly. The soldier gave him the barest nod: steady. They could not afford mistakes now. The plan depended on perfect timing. The device, disguised as a piece of scrap metal, was hidden within their cargo. If the guards inspected too closely, all was lost. Luck held. The aliens shoved them forward into a holding cell, uninterested in further scrutiny. The moment the door sealed, the team moved. The engineer worked quickly, rewiring the cell's console with stolen Dominion tech. The soldier kept watch, his fingers tight around a makeshift blade hidden in his sleeve. Outside, the distant hum of the flagship's reactor thrummed through the walls. Their target. Meanwhile, on Earth, the professor monitored their progress through a hacked communications feed. Static made the signal unreliable, but the occasional burst of data confirmed the team was alive. Time was running out. The warlord had begun his final assault: massive drop ships descended on the last strongholds, and orbital bombardments lit up the night sky. If the weapon failed, Earth would burn before dawn. Back aboard the flagship, the team slipped into the maintenance corridors, avoiding patrols with painstaking care. The reactor core lay deep within the ship, protected by layers of security. The engineer's hands flew over a stolen access panel, bypassing locks with a mix of human ingenuity and reverse-engineered alien code. The soldier's jaw clenched as an alarm blared somewhere in the distance. Had they been discovered? No. A different sector. The aliens were distracted, their attention turned toward Earth's surface as the invasion reached its peak. The team pressed forward, the air growing thick with the acrid scent of Dominion energy cells. Finally, they reached the reactor chamber, a massive, pulsing heart of blue light, powering the entire fleet's defenses. The engineer set to work, attaching the device with practiced precision. The soldier stood guard, his pulse steady despite the danger. This was it. One wrong move, and the reactor would vaporize them all. The device beeped softly, its activation sequence beginning. They had minutes to escape. As they turned to leave, the door hissed open. A Dominion commander stood frozen in shock for half a second, just long enough. The soldier's blade found its mark, but the alarm was raised. Shouts echoed through the corridors. They ran, blaster fire scorching the walls behind them. The shuttle was too far. They wouldn't make it. The soldier grabbed the engineer's arm, shoving him toward an escape pod. Go. Now. The younger man hesitated, but the soldier's glare brooked no argument. Someone had to survive. Someone had to tell Earth what they'd done. As the pod launched, the soldier turned to face the oncoming aliens, his weapon raised. The device beeped its final countdown. Somewhere below, the warlord's triumphant speech to his troops was cut short as the flagship's core erupted in a silent, blinding flash. In orbit, the pulse rippled outward. Across the fleet, shields flickered and died. On Earth, the professor's screen lit up with a single word: success. The sky above Earth erupted in silent fire as the Dominion fleet reeled from the electromagnetic pulse. Ships that had once been untouchable now drifted powerless, their shields gone, their weapons dead. On the surface, humans watched in stunned silence as the glowing trails of falling wreckage streaked through the atmosphere like dying stars. The warlord's voice, moments ago booming with triumph, had vanished from every comm channel. The impossible had happened, humanity had struck a crippling blow. But the battle was far from over. Deep in the ruins of a shattered command center, the professor stared at the flickering screens, his hands shaking not from fear but exhaustion. The pulse had worked, but it was only the first step. The Dominion still had troops on the ground, still had ships in orbit that hadn't been fully disabled. And they would retaliate. The Resistance had minutes, maybe hours, before the aliens regrouped. He grabbed a nearby radio, his voice hoarse but firm. "All units, move now. This is our only chance." Across the planet, hidden bunkers and makeshift bases burst into action. Tanks long buried under debris were unearthed, their rusted barrels loaded with whatever ammunition remained. Fighter jets, grounded for years, roared to life as mechanics and pilots worked frantically to get them airborne. This was not a coordinated army, it was a ragtag collection of survivors, soldiers, and civilians who had spent years waiting for this moment. They had one order: push back. In the streets of what was once a thriving metropolis, the remnants of the Resistance advanced under the cover of smoke and falling ash. The Dominion's ground troops, cut off from their fleet, fought with brutal efficiency, but for the first time, they were on the defensive. Humans swarmed their positions, using guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and sheer numbers to overwhelm them. The aliens had never faced an enemy like this, one that refused to die, refused to surrender, even when the odds seemed impossible. Above them, the sky was a battlefield. Human pilots, flying outdated and patched-together fighters, weaved through the crippled Dominion ships, targeting engines and weapon systems. Every explosion in the void was a cheer on the ground, a sign that the tide was turning. But the warlord was not finished. His flagship was gone, but his will was not broken. From a secondary command vessel, he issued new orders: scorched earth. If he could not rule this world, he would reduce it to cinders. The professor's warning came too late. A surviving Dominion battleship, its weapons still operational, turned its guns toward Earth's surface. Not toward military targets, toward the last refugee camps, the last pockets of civilians. The warlord's final act would be genocide. Humanity had one last card to play. Buried beneath an Antarctic ice shelf, a relic of the pre-invasion world stirred to life. A single missile silo, forgotten by time, its systems still intact. The codes had been lost, the personnel long dead, but the Resistance had spent years searching for it. Now, as the Dominion battleship prepared to fire, the silo's doors groaned open. There was no countdown. No dramatic speech. Just a single technician, her hands steady on the controls, pressing the firing sequence. The missile streaked into the sky, a trail of fire cutting through the darkness. The warlord's ship had just enough time to detect the incoming threat before the warhead struck its bridge. The explosion lit up the sky like a second sun. On the ground, the soldier who had sacrificed himself would never see it. But the engineer, tumbling to earth in his escape pod, did. And for the first time since the invasion began, he smiled. Silence settled over the battlefield like a held breath. The last Dominion warship, its command structure obliterated by the Antarctic missile, listed drunkenly in orbit before breaking apart in a slow, fiery cascade. On the surface, the alien ground troops faltered, their communications severed, their leaders dead. For the first time since their arrival, they did not advance. They hesitated. The resistance did not. From every ruined city, every scorched forest, every hidden bunker, humanity surged forward. Civilians armed with scavenged weapons fought beside the last remnants of Earth's militaries. Farmers wielded plasma rifles stripped from dead aliens. Children too young to remember peace carried ammunition to the front lines. This was not a war of armies anymore, it was a war of survival, and every living soul had become a soldier. The professor, his hands still trembling from exhaustion, watched the tide turn from a makeshift command post. His screens flickered with scattered reports, a Dominion outpost overrun here, a supply depot seized there. The aliens were retreating. Not in an orderly withdrawal, but in a rout. Their discipline had collapsed with their fleet. Now, they were the ones hunted. But the cost had been unimaginable. Smoldering ruins stretched as far as the eye could see. The bones of great cities stood like gravestones. The air reeked of smoke and ionized metal. And the dead, human and alien alike, lay where they had fallen, their stories ended in the dirt. The professor closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the distant echoes of gunfire. They had won the battle. But the war? That remained to be seen. Above, the sky was no longer filled with enemy ships. Earth, this is Captain Vance of the Odyssey. We're coming in hot. Hold your fire. The Odyssey. A name from legend. One of Earth's first deep space colony ships, lost decades ago during an experimental warp jump. Presumed destroyed. Yet here it was, flanked by a dozen other vessels, some human designs, others clearly alien, but flying under the same banner. A banner stitched together from scraps of old Earth flags and symbols of forgotten nations. The engineer nearly collapsed at the console. They're ours. The story spilled out in broken transmissions. The Odyssey hadn't been destroyed, it had been flung across the galaxy by its experimental drive, stranded in a system on the far edge of Dominion territory. There, they'd found others, enslaved species, rebel factions, worlds crushed under the Dominion's heel. For years, they'd fought a shadow war, striking from the void, too weak to challenge the Empire directly, until Earth's pulse weapon disabled the fleet. That was their signal. Their chance. Now, they'd come home. The first shuttles touched down in what was left of old landing fields, their hatches hissing open to reveal faces no one had seen in a lifetime. Colonists in patched flight suits. Alien allies with weapons slung across their backs. Children born among the stars who'd never set foot on Earth until now. They brought supplies, medics, engineers, and answers. The Dominion wasn't just an empire. It was a parasite, leeching the strength from 100 worlds to feed its expansion. Earth had been its next target, but now, with its fleet in ruins and its warlord dead, its grip was slipping. The Odyssey's allies had already sparked rebellions across 3 sectors. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The professor listened, his hands steady for the first time in weeks. This changed everything. Earth wasn't just a survivor, it was a rallying point. A symbol. The place where the Dominion had first met real resistance. Outside, the sky darkened with incoming ships, not as invaders, but as kin. The engineer watched them come, his throat tight. Somewhere up there, in the cold void, the soldier's body still drifted. But his sacrifice hadn't been for nothing. The tide was turning. And Earth was no longer alone. The war councils began at dawn. In the skeletal remains of an old government building, representatives from Earth and the newly arrived allies gathered around makeshift tables strewn with maps and battle plans. The air hummed with a dozen languages, human and alien alike, all translated through hastily patched-together systems. Captain Vance stood at the center, his face hardened by years of guerrilla warfare in the stars. The Dominion's core worlds are vulnerable, he said, tapping a holodisplay showing the galactic arm. Their forces are scattered, putting down rebellions. If we strike now, at their heart, we can end this. The professor studied the display, his fingers tracing the route to the Dominion's throne world. It was a gamble. Earth's defenses were in ruins, and the Allied fleet was a patchwork of stolen ships and jury-rigged fighters. But the alternative, waiting for the Dominion to regroup, was unthinkable. He looked at the engineer, who gave a grim nod. They had no choice. Preparations began immediately. The surviving human pilots trained alongside alien counterparts, learning the quirks of unfamiliar spacecraft. Engineers worked around the clock, integrating Dominion salvage into Earth's remaining weapons. Civilians, those too old, too young, or too wounded to fight, scoured the ruins for anything usable. A child presented the professor with a dented power core, salvaged from a crashed fighter. For the big gun, they said solemnly. The professor took it with a quiet thanks. As the fleet assembled in orbit, Earth's surface buzzed with frantic energy. This was no longer just about survival. It was about vengeance. About ensuring no other world would suffer as they had. The warlord was dead, but the Dominion's emperor still ruled from his glittering spire, unaware that the species he'd marked for extinction was now marching toward his doorstep. The night before departure, the engineer stood on a broken rooftop, staring at the stars. Somewhere up there was the soldier's final resting place, his body forever drifting among the wreckage of the flagship. The engineer raised a stolen Dominion canteen in salute. "We'll finish it," he murmured, then drank. Dawn came too soon. The Allied fleet, a ragged armada of human cruisers, alien warships, and repurposed Dominion vessels, lifted from Earth's surface in waves. Below, those left behind watched in silence as the last of their defenders rose into the sky. No cheers. No fanfare. Just the whisper of wind through empty streets and the distant rumble of engines. The jump to Dominion space was a blur of starlight and tension. When the fleet re-emerged, the throne world lay before them, a gleaming orb of spires and shimmering shields. The Imperial Guard scrambled to respond, but they were unprepared. The Dominion had never been attacked. Not like this. The battle was brutal. Human-led squadrons weaved through defensive fire, targeting shield generators. Alien allies boarded command ships, cutting off reinforcements. And at the center of it all, Captain Vance's Odyssey plunged toward the Imperial Palace like a spear. The Emperor died as he had lived, in a throne room, surrounded by gold. He never saw the shot that took him. When the news spread, the Dominion fractured. Some warlords fled. Others surrendered. Across 100 worlds, enslaved species rose up, tearing down Dominion banners with hands that had known nothing but chains. 3 weeks later, the first ships returned to Earth. They brought news of victory, and something more. A promise. The galaxy would never again bow to a single empire. The Allies would see to that. The professor stood in the ruins of the old command center, listening to the distant sound of rebuilding. The engineer approached, holding a data chip. "First transmission from the new coalition," he said. "They're calling it the Earth Accords." The professor smiled. It was a fragile piece. But it was a start. Above them, the stars shone clear for the first time in years, no longer hidden behind the smoke of war, no longer watched over by conquerors. Just stars. And somewhere among them, the soldier could finally rest.